Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Rock Your Shine After You've Been Cracked Wide Open. I know you guys hear me say this every week, how honored I am to have my guest this week is so special because this is a colleague of mine that I've worked with for years and years and we reconnected after, gosh, I don't even know how many years we haven't talked, just 2 or 3, maybe even longer, Allie. And I am just thrilled to pieces that we have reconnected and rekindled our friendship and our connection and our professional lives. And I am deeply honored to have Allison with us here today. I just want to read her bio so we give everyone a sense of who Allison is. Allison Jackson-Dyer is a vice president of learning and development and principal owner of Resilient Leaders. Allison has led complex teams and companies large and small for more than 20 years. She's a thought leader, a keynote speaker, a trainer, and a coach to leaders at every level of companies committed to building stronger teams and more impactful results. She delivers results through a better understanding of trauma, emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, cultural differences, mindfulness, and the importance of vulnerability and authentic leadership. And we'll be talking a lot about what she is doing now. I just want to add, though, that she's also a certified Dare to Lead facilitator. So many of you out there have heard of Brene Brown and all of her amazing work. And Allison has gone through that training and is now able to do that with other leaders. So, Allison, welcome, welcome, welcome.
You. This feels like a fireside chat.
That's kind
I'm
of
gonna remember other people are here, but I'm like, oh, Susan and I are gonna sit and talk about things that we're passionate about.
I know, and I'm so excited. I think that this is the perfect time, and you have such a beautiful story around your own development as a leader in the field of trauma and what you've been through. And I thought it would be perfect for what we're trying to do here with Rock Your Shine. So welcome.
Thank you. I am so glad to be here and so glad I always believe that people hear what they're meant to hear at the exact moment they're meant to hear it. So just to people listening, don't pre-think what you're meant to hear. Just listen because you're going to hear exactly what you're meant to hear.
I love that. And I agree with that. So let's start, Allison. You've got such a rich story. And let's start in your early years when you first were cracked wide open. And let's take it from there.
Yeah, I love the question. So when I think about cracked wide open, it's interesting. There's research that shows from the moment someone feels like their first mental health symptom to the point they're diagnosed, like not even get treatment, is like sometimes 15 years. So you think about kids like having that. So like I can remember moments at 4 years old where I just knew I hurt. And I would lock myself in a closet or even hold a knife to my wrist and go, I hurt, I hurt, I hurt. But no one knew what was happening for me, right? There wasn't a name for it. So I think I was probably cracked wide open. And if we get really spiritual, probably the agreement I made even before I came to this earth, I was probably cracked wide open. But if we go with 4 years old, then it was likely, which my TED Talk talks about, like being a teenager and locked in residential over and over again, and just really having reinforced by a system I love that I was broken, the mental health system, that just being told you're broken. But then that person who was a mental health tech with no letters behind his name, like seeing me and saying, I see that you're meant to be something more than this kid locked in this room. You just have to wait a minute and we're going to find it.
Tell us, let's back up. What was happening at 4 years old when you said, I hurt?
It's a great question. So I think that when I have, a lot of us who have trauma echoes or memories, we can remember the feeling better than actually what happened. But what I remember feeling there was there's something in my body that hurts and I'm not supposed to be here. And I don't know how to make the hurt better. And so there was a lot of abuse happening in my family towards me and around me. And so I fully believe that my body was filled with that pain, not just my own pain of being abused, but just how much pain was in the household. And so as we know, often with people who cut, it's not always because I'm trying to die. It's actually a release. And so I think my body was already at 4 years old trying to say there's so much toxic in my body. I don't know how to let this out. And I don't know how to signal to an adult that I'm not okay.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to take a moment to announce some exciting news that I am finally releasing my 6-week grief and loss virtual course, and lots more information in the show notes about the course. It's a PDF that you can pull up and read all about the details, what we're going to be covering, the focus, and the structure of the course. You can sign up on my website, rockyourshine.com. You'll find Leap into Light and Healing under the service menu. The course will begin on Wednesday, June 7th, and that'll be held from 6 to 7 Eastern Time. So if you or anyone you know is ready to take the next step in their healing and really have a place to share and process, then please send them over to rockyourshine.com. I look forward to working with you guys. Take care and enjoy the rest of the show. So you said that you worked with this tech that saw you. Talk to us a little bit about that, because that feels like the early inklings of really what eventually sent you on a very different path as you grew. So talk to us.
Yeah. Absolutely. So parents got divorced at 13, which was actually a really good thing. They shouldn't have been together. That was a good thing. But that also began my journey of just repeated suicide attempts and being put in acute hospitalizations, which back during that time wasn't like 72 hours. You stayed there 6, 8, weeks, not 3 months. And so Howard was one of the staff members. A lot of times we think of them as babysitters that just watch kids from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. I have some emotions about how they're not respected, right? And it wasn't that psychiatrists and therapists like myself don't have value, but they didn't happen to be, as we'll talk about later, leaders. Howard was a leader. He didn't need letters behind his name. And so he was like, I don't buy that this is just a broken kid. And so the story I tell that was like, I truly believe the cracked wide open moment was I was really acting out. I knew exactly how to get locked up. I knew exactly how to work every system in a hospital, all of that kind of stuff. And so I was really upset, screaming and yelling, knew I was going to get locked down. And he came to me and he, and in a moment that I was calm, and he was like, look, I'll tell you what, I know you like tearing stuff up. If you go to the gym with me and do this like 30-minute workout, I'll let you come back and you can break everything on the unit and you won't get, they called it BR back then, but you won't get any consequences. And I was like, hell yeah. I was like, 16. I was like, yeah. And so I went and I remember doing this workout with him and I like crawled back to the actual unit. Like my whole body was sore and I didn't want to throw anything. Right. And that was what he did, is for the first time in my life, he taught me a different way to release. And when I had that release, he sat there and he was like, let's talk about who you are and who you want to be.
I have,
And
I have a question that,
yeah,
just this feeling came over me when you were talking about being this, because, I worked in the juvenile justice system for a long,
yeah,
well, I volunteered, I didn't actually work there. And a lot of angry, traumatized children in juvenile justice, right? I would say 100% of them are. And so I'm just curious, when you said that you knew what it took to get yourself locked up, was there an element of safety for you there?
oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's that, and I just got chills. I was thinking about that, like for these children who live in abusive households, but also children who have been traumatized,
Yeah,
their container of safety has been stripped away from them, right? And so
absolutely.
I was thinking that as you were talking, did you try to get hospitalized because you knew that you were going to be held there?
Absolutely. And it's funny. So a couple things came up when you were talking is I'm really cautious about not using the word safe space anymore, only because it's such a power thing of like, I'm going to create a safe space, right? Safe space is so co-built, which I believe is how you were talking about. Like, it's not something we just do to people. It's what's created. And so
Definitely,
there are
yes.
lots of things broken in that hospital. Like, we know lots of things in juvenile justice and hospitals happen that are not safe. But there was a safety in my relationship with Howard. Like, when I was with him, I knew that I was protected by an adult that absolutely loved me and wanted me to be my best self. And so I would have done anything to get back to Howard. So I knew how to answer intake questions. I knew what the things were to get marked as, oh, you have to be hospitalized. And I just kept coming back because of that container relationship. And if you've worked or volunteered, there are so many kids that those relationships are absent in their community, in their schools. If they find one, kids are very smart in getting back to the person that gives them their best shot of making it. And that's absolutely what I was doing with Howard.
So talk to us about that healing journey where you were this teen, you were being hospitalized. Howard, it sounds like, was this incredible mentor in your life.
Yeah.
So what happened with your own evolution?
Yeah. So I think Howard was the first person that helped me knew I wanted to live, honestly, because I think even that little 4-year-old was like, there's too much pain in here. I need to leave this world. Right. And Howard was the first person that I was like, maybe I could figure out how to navigate this grief and stay in this world. Right. And I'll just honor for, listeners, you know this about me. I practice Buddhism. And so I really have a deep belief in we have multiple lives and we have journeys in each life. So that's different than some people. But I think for me, I just was trying to figure out in this life, what am I supposed to do? And am I even supposed to be here? And I don't know that I had language for it back then, but I was still trying to figure that out. So kind of after Howard, it was, okay, I want to live. I don't know how to be in relationships, and I was still in a lot of unhealthy ones. You lived through some of that with me, of just domestic violence relationship after domestic violence relationship, in the mix of having beautiful, amazing daughters. And like, gosh, I don't even know if I know how to get my personal life like together in terms of knowing how to find a partner. So that evolution took a lot longer to find that piece. But what I was good at is I was really good at school.
I
I
was
mean,
just going to say that. And in the midst of all of this, you're getting all of these degrees in this field to help people with
that help
trauma.
people, right? And so I always laugh when people come to me and be like, people will be with my daughters and be like, gosh, you have the most amazing mom, and she must be like so incredible at parenting, all these things, and they'll smile. And it's not that they don't think I am, but I'm always like, if you want to know the real deal, talk to my girls for a minute. They'll know that, I'll keep it like kid friendly. They shouldn't always have her poop together, right? Like, it was like, mom doesn't have it all together. So I was accumulating all these degrees to help people, which isn't all that uncommon in human services, that it's like we're trying to heal ourselves,
No,
right?
us wounded beings. I know, exactly. Well, I say this all the time on this show, even. We teach what we must learn. And, yes, what grows up must grow down. I mean, there's lots of different sayings for the same exact thing, but that's what leads us. Somebody just asked me, sorry, just let me interject this for a moment. I just had a friend this morning ask me, she texted me and she said, hey, is empathy and compassion the same for you, or are they different? And I said, well, for me, the way I think about empathy is that you can feel for a dilemma or a tragedy or a trauma that people are going through, but compassion leads you to action, to actually do something. This is the way I think about empathy versus compassion. And I think oftentimes compassion leading us to action is because either somebody very close to us has gone through this, or we have gone through it ourselves. I talk about my brother's death, for example. I was very empathic. I did a lot of work around grief and loss over the years, but it wasn't until my brother died that I moved from that deep empathy to that compassion, where then I was moved to really expand my lane around what I wrote a book, I have a podcast, etc. So I bring that up only because of what you're just saying, that I think that those of us who have experienced things in our life move us into this kind of work.
Absolutely. And I think there's a rawness to it. And I think that it is, I mean, a lot of people will use in different spiritual and even religious practices the word calling. I think there's something with that compassion piece that
Yes,
for me, I
100%.
got touched with a higher calling. And I love Carolyn Meese's work of we make even agreements, sacred contracts before we even come in, right? And I think that for me, some of us get to discover that sacred contract. Some of us may not, because so much is laid upon us and we don't, we don't can't figure out the path to get to that contract. For me, the piece with Howard, and then the next piece with, honestly, it was meeting our team, Susan. Like it was being promoted to, I was really good at therapy and I was really good at in-home work and I was really good at being with people and being a clinical supervisor. And it was funny because people are like, gosh, you have a natural piece with this. But back then I never talked about being in a hospital. I never talked about. So it was like, yeah, academics helped me, but it was my calling that when I was with people, I could hold that trauma. I could be a container for that space. That was something a lot deeper. The science helped me do better. But when we connected as a team of women in that corporate university, it was like a belonging sense of, oh, wow, like I am with other women of purpose. And
Yeah.
like, we're going to rock this,
Yeah.
And it wasn't that we weren't crying in our own lives or having these things happen, but together we were greater. And so that was probably my next moment of deep mentorship, was being with you and the rest of our team in a place that truly supported our abilities to lead and be in our calling.
And I love that. I mean, just for listeners, Allison and I worked for a huge international behavioral health organization, and we were on a corporate team that was the corporate university of Providence. So we did a lot of training around the country, and I also felt very insulated because we had this just amazing group of women that
Mhm.
shared that we were all deeply spiritual, and it was very special. It was a very special time to be on a team of women like that.
Yeah. And I felt very whole, like my whole self was. So often I think we feel on stage in our life. And with us, I didn't feel on stage. I felt my whole self. And so I think I was able to accomplish some of the biggest things in my life
Yeah,
there.
it's going to bring me to tears. And
I know.
to this
Yeah.
day, I still have such a deep love for all of the women that were on that
Yeah.
team because it was a growth spur. And I think that what made it, because I know we're going to move into this, and just to set the stage, I think that what made it so beautiful is that we were with women that were deeply committed to the greater good, that we knew that the work we were doing was for the greater good. And we really did have this place to really shine our light around what we were trying to do. And also, we understood that we were whole people, and we never bought into this idea that there was your personal life and your professional life. We were encouraged and we were invited to bring our whole being to our work.
Yes. Yes. And it was, and I think that, yes. And I think that's exactly where we should go. It's interesting because I think too, one of the things that happened there was we were able to, like the retreats we took, like I can literally visualize the fireplace right now. And we were literally in a place which maybe many generations might not remember, but we had no phone service, like in the mountain we stayed in,
Yes.
which was like, there was one central phone where we stayed. And so we all heard each other's phone calls and stuff. And we like sat together, but that level of intimacy and wholeness. And I think it was also the moment though, that while we all had, every single one of us had a mission for youth and families, the
Yeah.
business of our work, but we were making a transition of believing in that the people who did the work for youth and families had just as much right to be whole. And our
Yes.
role in the corporate university was in creating not only for ourselves, but how do we create more wholeness and humanity in people that do, I may be biased, but some of the toughest jobs there are on the front
Yes.
line.
I
And
agree.
that was the moment I shifted into like client work to wait, this work is about people.
And let's go here because this little trip didn't end well, right? And I think
No.
that And I think that that's where when we really talk, gosh, I'm going to start to cry.
I
When we
know.
really talk about how grief and loss, how those moments in our life not only stop us in our tracks and split us wide open. We have a choice, right? We have a choice that we can crumble, or we can really embrace who we are at our essence in an entirely different way. So bring us, because you got promoted off our
Yeah.
team. So
Right.
bring us down this road, because I think
Yeah.
this is
So
really powerful.
it was hard to leave that team because of what we talked about. And yet I wanted to get out in a bigger way in the company. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a vice president. And like, we're going to bring and all of those things that I used to think were unique to me, but I realize it happens so often, right? Of wanting to do that. And so I went into that space, and I was just thinking when you said cry, like, cause I can laugh, but I also know sometimes humor is my defense mechanism in grief. So I was just checking in with myself, because I can remember the moment of being in an office and we were doing this incredible work around integrative healthcare, and I was closing deals and I felt being really successful. And we were in a client's building that wasn't our building, and we finished this really powerful meeting, and I walked out and I asked the CEO of the division at that time, like, hey, how's it going? I'll call him Bob. I was like, hey, Bob, how's it going? He's like, pretty tough, because I'm going to have to let you go today. And I remember just like at first, because he had a great sense of humor, I was like, huh? And my direct supervisor was there, and he was like, and you too. And so then I was like he kind of guided us into this small room, and I realized, because when we get sucker punched like that with grief, our body is desperately trying to catch up with reality, because
Well, you're in shock, and
yeah,
it's actually almost an out of body experience, where you're
yes,
trying to process what's happening, but there's nothing about it that feels real, and you
right.
don't know how to reconcile those two things that are happening at the same time.
Yeah. And we know, I mean, I love Kubler-Gooding-Ross's work very much. And I love it's that denial piece, which some people are like, it doesn't happen, but it's literally that outer body of like, this cannot be happening right now. What I also say about that, though, is somehow I thought with Kubler-Gooding-Ross, it's like, okay, denial, check, I'm done. Anger, check, I'm done. And we know it doesn't work that way. You bounce around in those for a while. But I was definitely in the like limbic system, but just frozen. And so I remember saying, like, I'm going to step out, because I wanted to give my supervisor the dignity of hearing the information first. And I'm sitting in the hall, and the clients come out, and they're like, what are y'all doing in the building? It's a secure building and you can't be here. And you know me, I have a sarcastic sense of humor. I was like, hold on a second. And I walked to the CEO and I was like, hey, you got to fire me in the parking lot, because we're not allowed to be here. And we literally stood in an elevator with our clients. I had been told that I probably wouldn't get a severance package if I spoke. And so we go down in this elevator, we walk to this parking lot, and I had to agree not to talk about certain things, even back then when I signed it, which I won't, but we're in the parking lot, and he's like, okay, so this is, and I remember him asking for a hug, the CEO, and it was the first moment I felt my power. Like, it was one moment I got back in my body. And you have to remember, I came from an abuse history, right? So people abuse you and then hold you, and somehow it's okay. And I
I
think that, yeah. And it's not okay. And I think somehow I came back in my body to my inner child, and it was like, no, you won't hug me. And I got in my car, and the tearful moment I feel right now was like the little girl that got so hurt in that moment by, not that we don't have to make business decisions where people lose their job. It is how we treat people in those moments, and
It's
how
and it's
people.
all yes, and it's everything. And I say this all the
Yeah.
time. Two things: intention and delivery.
Yes.
And there are so many ways. I always use divorce. It's a perfect example of really, we can do divorce well, and we can really
Yeah.
traumatize each other. And
Yeah.
so I'm sure people are wondering, I have to ask the question.
Yeah.
Obviously, you do not have to divulge anything that you
Right.
are not able to.
Right.
What
Right.
was, because you had no idea that this was
Oh
coming,
no, this is
zero, like you
100%
were
blindside.
completely blindsided. And I remember
As
because
was my direct supervisor. And
Right.
actually I had two direct supervisors because I still reported to our team lead, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I also reported that, and neither one of them were told prior to this
That's
happening.
right too. I remember that now.
Yeah.
But what I don't remember is why were you let go? Was it because was it a budget thing?
So I think the part that I can say is looking back is that the company was about to be kind of boxed up for sale.
Yes.
And so one of the things that was happening was that they were eliminating fat, so to speak. That's a common corporate experience of how can we get rid of all of these different positions so we're a leaner sale.
Right.
So I think that was probably the budgetary reason. I'll say for me, the more emotional reason or convenient reason that leads me probably to the next part of my junior is you probably remember I was a fierce advocate for our frontline staff. So I had been pushing a lot of conversations that people didn't want to have, and a lot of it is not okay not to provide good health insurance to people on the front lines. Like it is not okay for us to take a larger profit when we are not taking care of people on the front line. And that had led to a lot of concerns. And I think, it's funny because I wouldn't have connected it, Susan, but that 4-year-old girl that was crying because her body was so full with toxin, I had been crying a lot in the past year of my job, like that last year of my job. And people had talked to me about how I'm professional. Interestingly enough, it had been, as you remember, at the vice president level, there were only 3 of us who were female. It was very male heavy, as was the C-suite. And so I had a lot of people, male, and even the other 2 females say, you can't cry, you can't cry, you can't cry. And now I look back and I was the one crying in meetings saying, we can't treat people like this, and being told I was unprofessional. So I think that those 2 factors of one, it was as a business, which happens all the time during corporate sales. But the other was that I was loud. And with the profit margins that the company wanted to make, what I was speaking was not what wanted to be heard.
And so here you are, just out of the blue, because he was a good friend. I mean, this
Oh, we knew each other well because it was weird. It was a big company, but we all knew each other really
exactly,
well, spent
yes.
time together.
And it was, and because I just remember that we also, our team was like, what is actually happening right
Right.
now? And so tell us what happened, because that was probably, I think, you and I have talked numerous times. I mean, and
Right.
that was a pretty dark
Oh,
time.
I mean, you talk about cracked open. I mean, I think the 4-year-old self, I talked about the being in hospitals in a corner going, I'm not going to make it, before Howard connected with me, dark spot. But I can remember, and again, I remember I was in Maryland and I lived in Virginia. So I had to drive home after this happened. And I remember being proud of myself that said, no, you can't touch me. Right. But then getting in the car and just sobbing. And it's like, oh my gosh, I don't have a job. I'm not going to be able to take care of my 3 kids. Like my entire career of 13 years is over. How am I ever going to recover? The shame that swooped in on me of like, I have always been an overachiever. I've been the one that breaks the bar. And so there, whether you want to call it ego or confidence, there was a piece of like, this doesn't happen to me. Like I am, I'm the one that was brought on projects to help them be successful. And so all of that grief, because what it came back to is I learned very young as a child, you have to overfunction or you won't be loved. So there was some piece in me that was screaming then going, you didn't try hard enough. And now you are being cracked wide open, like everything is being ripped from you. So it was a very, very dark space of do I stay in my profession? Can I take care of my kid? I was a mother who, as a young single mother, was on welfare and had a lot of shame around that. And so it was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go back to that. Like I've gone from being, for some of us, a 6-figure salary is a really big deal, right? Like really working from a mentor making $12 an hour to being a vice president and having financial security and offering my kids opportunities and safety that I never thought I could offer. It was this image of, Allison, you've done something so wrong in your life. You're going to go back to that. You're going to go back to that studio with 3 kids and being scared if you can feed them. That's what was happening in my body.
And I want to say something, because I want people to really understand. Here we go, I'm going to get emotional again, who you are at your core, because this was also a time you had chosen to leave an abusive relationship, a marriage. It was a very difficult decision because of your children. You, at the same time, you were getting your PhD, and you had your PhD, I think, by the time you got let go from Providence. I think you finished it.
So yeah, 4 years. It was 4 years after I had finished my PhD. Yep.
But I want people to understand, like, the strength and resilient human, brilliant, wonderful, loving, amazing woman that you are, and that all of these things were happening. And here you took this leap of faith. Because I know you didn't want to leave our team. We talked about it. You were really struggling. Do I take this job? And the job was offering you, like you said, a greater platform, if you will, to make the kind of changes you wanted to, to do more work, for it to be more far reaching. And then this happens. And you were kind of cut off at the knees. And so now you've left this marriage, you've got your kids, you don't have a job. They gave you severance though, right? Did you get a severance package?
I did. So that, which I didn't even understand. I mean, like at that moment, like I'd never been let go from a job. So all I heard driving back from Maryland was like, you are unemployed, like you have nothing. Like I didn't understand all of that. And even then, I think it's been interesting talking to people who've had that experience, and I've realized how common it is, which makes me really sad that we end relationships in that way with people. I read something in Gallup recently. We spend it's approximated in our lifetime, we spend 81,000 hours with the people at work in our lifetime. It is where we spend more relational hours than likely any other relationship. And so to watch relationships end in that way. And so like all I heard was, because again, trauma echoes, I was back to being like a 24-year-old, 27-year-old single mom who was not eating so my kids could eat, trying to go to the master's program.
Can we pause and you define trauma echoes just for listeners who may not know what a trauma echo is?
Yeah, no, I love that question. So for me, and I think it's an official thing, I've said it for a long time, but the experience is well documented, is that even though, and I try to think like how old I was in 2014, I mean, that's 9 years ago, right? So I was probably like 42. So even though my 42-year-old body was on 95 driving, knowing like I have resources, I have connections, I have things, my internal self was back to being 24 years old, and like I have a visceral image of like having to choose between me eating or my oldest daughter eating. So none of the knowledge or ability to understand that I was 42 with different skills was there. It's literally like you retro back. That's the echo part. You go back to an earlier stage of life. And flashbacks are something probably most people have heard, but the flashback experience is so real that even though you're not seeing a movie reel in front of you, you think that's where you are again, like that visceral body of. And so I was back to being like, I have nothing, like literally I have nothing was visceral. And it was going to be a huge challenge. That part was real. I had just lost my job. I didn't have nothing, but that's what my body was telling me.
And are trauma echoes anything like PTSD? When, we hear of veterans, if they hear a loud noise, they take cover because they're back in the field and they're, with gunfire. Is it similar?
I think it's similar. I think they're connected. So a lot of times what we hear, that is to me more what a flashback is like. So like the muffler of a car explodes and you see someone dive for cover. So there's a muscle memory experience, right? That says I go there. So trauma echoes are a little bit more like experiential of like I could have a flashback with it, but it's more like chronologically, you almost shrink back to an earlier time. So your body goes back to all of the feelings inside that you had then. And so you regress in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So here you are, you're in your car, for you, and this is where we catastrophize, right? And that's a positive psychology term, right? It's like, okay, I've lost my job, and I literally now am going to have to pitch a tent in the backyard with my children.
Oh yeah. Or we go to darker places where I was like, okay, my life insurance policy is worth more than I'm worth. I got to figure out a creative way to die so my family will be okay. Like
I was going to ask you about suicide ideation.
yeah.
Because we have never talked about whether or not those
Mhm.
thoughts crossed your mind, because when we
Yeah.
feel desperate, it feels, but when I just want to, this is another side note, when we feel desperate, we see
Mhm.
things very black and white. It's this
Yes.
or this, right? Because
Right.
we, instead of being in an expansive place in fear,
Right.
we contract, and we don't, and with very tunnel vision, and we do not see the opportunities around us. We
At
can
all.
only see and stare at the closed door, and I either have to die or my kids aren't going to eat, right?
Right.
That's the black and white
Right.
thinking.
That's right. And I think when I think of it again from a Buddhist perspective, I remember this idea of, and getting angry during Dharma talk of like, what do you mean I'm responsible for my suffering, right? Like you and I have talked about this, but it's this idea that the root of suffering is connected to attachment. And so if I look at that, I was very attached to, having left that domestic violence experience, just finding my footing. My mom had been really sick with a lot of heart things. She was at my house. I had just kind of become attached to, okay, I'm financially secure, which means I'm okay. It's very attached to that. So when that got ripped from under me, my suffering came from, without that financial security, that binary you just talked about, I am nothing. And so in that way, I was contributing to my suffering because I was the one holding the binary. I was the one saying, I either have this job or I am nothing and have to die to support my kids because my life insurance policy is worth more than I am.
And let's take it one step further. Let's go deeper into our ego,
Yeah.
that we're also very attached to, for many of us, as we progress in our careers, we also, our identity, we over identify with our role and our title, right? And
Oh,
so you
100%.
also are losing your title of executive vice president, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
stripped, like literally
Oh,
your
yeah.
identity in our ego
Mm-hmm.
is stripped away, which brings us down to our
Who am
core.
I?
Yes.
Right. Well, one of the first activities, this is not a Brene activity, but we usually do icebreakers. Different facilitators do icebreakers, right? And so one of the first icebreakers that I do is people introduce themselves and they have 5 options. They can say like their nickname, they can say like, are they an introvert or extrovert? And then they define what that actually means. They can talk about their ancestry. How do they define their ancestry? They can talk about where they identify as growing up and what that means. So sometimes I'll have people who have worked together for 20 years. Sometimes they've never met each other. And what happens is people actually have to pause and breathe, because it is muscle memory for me to go, hi, Susan, I'm Allison. I'm the vice president of learning development for blah, 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 blah. Like it's such the identity of who I am. And so when we pause people and ask them to introduce themselves as whole people, there's this vulnerability in this breath that happens. And it's like, wow, how did I come so attached to this financial and positional identity, which I very much associate with Western culture, and that it is like literally in my blood and in my muscle memory that this is who you are. And so it is a ripping of, like, you talk about cracking wide open. Now who am I? If this doesn't exist, who am I?
Exactly. So tell us, Allison, how that experience
Yeah.
led you here. And please don't skip over the good stuff, because I
Yeah.
really want to know you
Yeah.
being in this car on the highway, wondering how you might take your own life and make it look like an accident, so that you're not, I'm not laughing because it's funny. You know my sense of
No,
humor.
I know, I
But
know.
it's
Well,
like,
I
how do
think
I
you're
make it look
laughing
like an
because you
accident
know
so now I
me.
won't
Like
have the
I was
stigma?
really plotting it out. Like I had the
Right.
whole story of how, like, and I definitely don't want for listeners who've experienced suicidalation. I mean, it's very
It's
real.
very,
It's
yes.
very real. And one of the dangers and why I've been in therapy so long is once you've crossed that willingness to do that, it can almost be addictive in terms of when things become so high pressured. I know I have that out. That's the ultimate out, that if it feels too dark, or if it gets too dark, this is my way out. And I think one of my challenges was I hung out with people that was very true for them. When I started spending time with people that wasn't true for them and their jaws dropped, like, that's an out. No, that's not an out. And it's like, no, in my world, it really is an out. And sadly, sometimes offers me comfort, but also offers real danger of a willingness to go there and having to develop a lot of skills in therapy that when that goes off in my head, going, Allison, you're in trouble. Like that you're becoming attracted to something that you know is not okay for you. And it's telling you that some feelings are happening in you that you need to find someone, not even necessarily a professional, but some type of support to go, I'm not okay right now because I am contemplating this and it's very
100%.
real for me. You know what I
So
mean?
what happened? Did you tell us that?
Yeah. So I think, one of the things Howard really changed suicidality for me. And I learned a lot of skills like staying in therapy for so long. And then actually, our leader at the corporate university hired me a coach. And that was really transformational too. I'd never met coaching before. So I had enough skills and I was able to tell a close friend and then also immediately call my therapist when I got home and just say, like, I am so not okay. And then I also laugh. So I have to always name the sense of humor. One of the things my mom did when I was growing up is she was like, okay, honey, if you're on your period, you can't make any big decisions for 3 to 7 days. It wasn't necessarily bad advice, but I literally learned that when I started to think about like ending my life, okay, you got to give it 3 to 7 days and then you can complete. And I almost made that kind of deal with myself in a way to tolerate the emotions that were happening and the grief that was about to happen. And that grief was going to bring up every past grief. And let's ride this for a minute before we make literally a permanent decision. And so I had a support system. And so I called on like several people and several things happened. Like I can remember calling you and I can just remember the people that I love dearly gasped when I told them and then just so validated me of like who I was as a human to validate that part. And so I had about 7 or 8 of those calls where people just so validated. Now, here's the tough part of grief. They go, wait till you see what's going to happen next. This is going to be the best thing that ever happened to you. And I wasn't ready
We
to hear
can't,
that.
yes. And, I love that you're saying this because I talk about this a lot in grief work, that we
Yeah.
say a lot of superfluous things because we're trying to help. That,
Yeah.
like when someone dies, we're like, oh, they're with the angels now. Things that aren't helpful. We
Yeah.
must feel, and I always say this, we must feel our way through it
Yeah.
first before you can jump to gratitude,
Yeah. Let me be
gratitude's the
grateful.
attitude or whatever. It's like
Right.
I can't be grateful for the experience until I'm able to process what has
Right.
happened to me. And being able to do that, we talked about safe place, people
Yeah.
who are worthy of holding that space for you,
Yes.
people that
Totally.
I got chills, people that you can call and you can trust with
Yeah.
your feelings, and
Yeah.
that you've got to be able to have them, because no one
Yeah.
has to say anything. They don't have to they can't make it better for you, but they
No.
can listen. And speaking of Buddhism, because that is also something that I also follow and believe in, and they call it compassionate listening, when you just do nothing. You're just listening. You're not giving any tips, nothing. And just listening to somebody helps to alleviate some of that suffering.
Yes. And it's so interesting because a huge part of my work now also involves diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work. And I have met just incredible colleagues, which we can talk about how interesting it is once you move through that grief and open yourself, like the people and opportunities that walk in your life. I mean, I say that not as a, it's going to be great thing, but like literally like letting it flow through you. But one of the things that she says, because she's she's all about story and the healing power of story. And she says this, I think I've heard Brene say it too, but it's an honor to hold space for me. And the art of story stewardship, the art of truly holding space for someone, is something I'm very passionate about building without. In Brene's newest book, like Atlas of the Heart, she talks about narrative tap out and narrative takeover, how quickly those two things can happen that break the space. right? Of narrative tap out of like the other person checks out or tries to distract you, right? Or narrative takeover when I go, oh, Susan, that's not nothing. Listen to what happened to me. And all of a sudden, the space that's sacred between two people to hold that pain and that peace has been broken. So really skilling people up and holding that. And I was fortunate that and this can happen too, I think, in grief. When you get cracked wide open, you think you lose everything. I've done a lot of work as a clinician, but also as a human being around people in recovery, whether that's from addiction or recovering from something else. And one of the things that's the fear is like, well, if I use, I've lost all of my recovery. And I love, and I can hear another colleague of mine I do recovery work with is recovery is not a linear process. And that took me a while. You don't go back to zero. And so in
Yes.
that moment, the fear was, I am going back to zero. What came to be true is I had several people capable of holding story for me. Like, and I didn't have that when I was young. Like, I did not have that when I was young. And so that was the place, not the bright, happy place, but that was the place that held my pain when I came out of that drive, that held my pain. Yeah.
So, okay, so just making this super tangible. So, the very first thing that you did in this element of being in a very dark space and really
Right.
going through this horrific trauma, because
Yeah,
when people lose their jobs out of the blue, it happens all the time. It is extremely traumatic. And
absolutely.
and it's also, I think it pops the bubble of illusion that we're ever in. When people are thinking about leaving their work and going after a dream, we cling to this idea of safety, but it's not safe. And we know that we'll get let go like that if there's something going on with the company.
Right.
So, okay. So the first thing that you did is you went to people that you knew could hold space for you, that you
Yeah,
could
I guess I would
cry.
even say the first thing I did was I protected myself and waited till I was someplace where I could lose it. So that was the car, literally pulling to a gas station down the street and going, "Blah!" Like just literally releasing all
Yeah.
of that, calling one person going, this just happened to me. How do I drive 2 hours home? And like the logistics of it, we say reset resilience. I had to reset to even make the drive home. And then once I got home, it was like, all right, who can I grieve with? The place that you were going. Who are those people that I can grieve with?
What happened next?
So the next piece was there was a huge interesting identity. So I was scheduled to speak at an event within 4 days of that happening. And so I had to call, and I was speaking for the company in a very public way. I checked with the company and they're like, well, you don't represent us, but you can still speak. You just have to announce that you represent yourself. And I remember calling and telling them, they're like, heck yeah, you can represent yourself. Like I knew the person over the conference. And so if you imagine within 4 days, I have to be on this big stage going, I know you all know me as the vice president of such and such. I'm actually Allison working for Allison because I hadn't invented a company. I hadn't invented like anything. I'm just like, well, I'm speaking for me. Right. So in one way, huge public humiliation. Right. But there was something about like the audience and the person that ran the conference. She and I had become really close. And she's like, you own you. And there was something about empowerment of just saying that in front of everyone that I work for me. And I think then more people came up to said, well, are you going to keep doing that? I hadn't thought about building my own company. I hadn't thought past what I was going to do. But there was this moment of when I publicly named in front of people, I work for me. We think naming it makes it more painful. And I think it can. For me, it made it less painful and it let me release. Like, this is where I am now, like true mindfulness, right? Like, I work for me. And so I wasn't done with all the grief of it, but that was the next moment of the next part of my journey. And I literally had, and you can totally pause me, but I had all of a sudden people show up at the word work of like, I know an attorney and here's a corporate and I'll write your logo and man. And it was just like, wow, like even before I had decided that I was going to work for me, people were like, if you make that decision, like we'll be the wind beneath your wings. We believe in you. And yeah, so that was my next journey. I was incorporated in less than 2 weeks.
It's such a beautiful story because I said earlier, when doors shut on us, everything that happens to us is for us. And that when the door slams shut, we have a choice. We can stare at the closed door and start banging on it and saying, why? And if we're doing that,
Right.
what we focus on grows. And so if we're focusing on that closed door, we are not seeing the door swinging wide open around us. And that's part of what you were saying before, where when we let go, if we hang on too tight. And so as you started to let go, and I get that there was a ton
Oh
of
yeah, I had to do a lot
healing
more
work. Yes.
Yeah. But that was the moment, because I think that's what I love about the Rock Your Shine is there are these cracks and that just floor us. But then if we can gasp some air, which I was able to do, just a couple of gasps from air and a little bit of releasing, even with not fully releasing, there is this shine. I mean, I would describe it as light that came in that said, I don't know if you're going to pick up on this, but here is, this is here, and it's huge. Right. And the other thing I was going to say before we move on is, and again, it depends on, and just for folks to know. So I grew up as a preacher's kid. I'm a preacher's grandkid. Like I'm a preacher's great niece. And I don't have I used to have negative feelings about Christianity. I don't have that at all anymore. Like I don't. And people will hear me use the word God. My husband is very steeped in his belief in Christianity. For me, Christianity, and it could have been the people that brought forward it to me, and so I had to reject it for a minute because of the pain that I experienced, because of the people. And we all know people can represent something and they don't really represent the religion itself. So that was my story. But when I got into Buddhism, that piece of, and so you can tell me if this comes from Buddhism or just other places, but sometimes I joke with people that I am a really stubborn, perseverant person. That's not a joke. That's just true. But if you're going to get me to reroute on a path, it's going to have to hit me between the eyes, because I'm just so much like, I'm going to do this. Like, you know what I mean? Even though, and so I think I had a million like detour signs in my life before I was let go in the parking lot that
Always.
said, get out.
Listen, and my listeners have heard me say this: universe starts with the whisper and ends with the scream. And it's just true. It is the
So I think that was the
absolute truth.
scream in the parking lot. I was like,
it was a
there's no
scream. It was like, listen, I've tried to tell you to make this less painful, but you're not listening. So now we're going to fire you in the parking lot, and then you'll get that you're not supposed to be here anymore.
Yes, because I could have stayed there forever in the toxicity. I would have, because I would have just kept, So I think that's the other piece of that. I love that. I love the whisper and the scream. So then the scream happens. I gulp for some air, and then I incorporated, and it was unbelievable. I became recognized as a small minority-owned business as a woman. I immediately started having state contracts who used to work with our company move things over to me. And literally, you imagine companies who brought me in and taught me how to set up my books, and like I would screw up invoices and they would be my customer and they're like, here's how to do it better. Like just like this openness, right? And I know, it's like any organization, government can get a really bad rap of all the things that can go wrong in government. But I got to tell you, some people in government so stepped up in their bureaucracy to foster me as a small minority owned business, of just like holding me. And so then, it literally took off, and I never grew to like more than myself as a full-time employee, but that was okay. And I took jobs more formally, informally. Like for a while, I was actually an employee of like the city of Richmond, but I kept my business going. At different times, I took on employment. But there was this beautiful moment, and I know he won't mind me saying out loud, I got really close with Secretary Hazel, who was our secretary in government under 2 administrations in Virginia. And he's a secretary of health. And he just was this person that like fostered relationship. And he met me one time, and I was sitting there and I could barely swallow. He gets brought up in his big car, and I'm like, who am I? And he was just like, we're going to do some work together. And like, he got me, we changed General Assembly law in Virginia, like things around trauma. Like he just saw me and got me in front of people. And I remember when I was working in an agency and I got really frustrated with red tape, and I asked to have breakfast with him, just me and him. And I sat with him and I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I keep going back and forth if I'm scared because I want a paycheck every 2 weeks, and I keep taking these jobs. And then I go back to working for myself because I'm mad at bureaucracy, and they won't let me have as big a voice as I want. And I don't know what I'm supposed to be when I grow up, or which side of the fence. I have this entrepreneurial spirit, but this civil service heart, and I don't know how to do this. And he looked at me and he said, Allison, you're a disruptor. And I was like, what's that? And he was like, you are meant to disrupt systems. Don't work for us again. Make us do better. And it was just this incredible moment of like reclaiming my identity. And so I love the disruptor term. And I realize I've been at
Wow,
whole
I
life.
do too.
Isn't that
That
awesome?
is so who you are. That is so,
Disruptor.
and it's also why you got part of the reason you got let go of your job, right? Because you were too much of a disruptor.
Yeah,
And
it's exactly why I was let go. Yeah,
wow,
and it's the thing
yeah,
that saves me and also makes my life hard. Brene Brown says that those of us who are the
play in the
bravest, the
ring.
most brokenhearted. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Like it is like because we feel it, and so yeah. So that was I never even realized what a mentor he was, but that story just came up. But yeah, so that was the next piece of once he said that to me, I have not gone back really to work for another company until the pandemic. I have like grew and grew my comic. And then a grief moment happened for all of us with COVID and life changed again. Yeah.
So I know we only have a few minutes left,
Yeah.
but tell us, so because you're just doing such incredible work, and because of your experience, you have now elevated to really working with leaders of large
Yeah.
organizations. So, I mean, and I know that this gorgeous evolution of the work that you're doing. So, talk to us now. Resilient Leaders is in the back of you,
I
and
know.
your brand. Yeah, tell us, give us, because I have two questions that I always end with, but I
Yeah.
want you to bring us to
Yeah.
where you are now with the incredible
Right.
work that you're doing.
Right. So in the pandemic, went back to doing mental health. So appreciate that work, realized it's not where my journey is. Suddenly had people blowing up my phone saying, hey, come back. But had a new commitment of realizing that when people, I would go in and teach trauma and resilient work, but it didn't take hold. And I realized something that I have known for the longest time, but it didn't hit me till it hit me, is that nothing changes without leadership. How many of us have gone to an incredible training and there are a couple rock stars that apply it, but mostly it ends up on the shelf. And
It starts from the top down, and you have to have the support, or
yeah,
you can't make the change happen. That's just the bottom line.
absolutely. Like change
Yeah,
management, right? And so that is when
exactly.
I went full force into this belief around Brené's definition of leadership is anyone who has the courage to see the potential in people and processes and hold themselves accountable to grow people and grow processes. And that's really what Resilient Leaders is about. Some people will be like, oh, she left her trauma and resilience work. No, I didn't, because we as people live trauma and resilience, and trauma work very truly is nothing more than grief and loss work. I mean, that is what trauma work is. It is
That's
grief
what it
and loss
is.
work,
Exactly,
period.
100%. Yeah,
Right.
period. Yeah.
Period. That is what it is. And so now I've gone into owning my own self of loving models like Dr. Brown's and others, but I've actually created my own framework and my own curriculums, and that is Resilient Leaders. And so still building it, and we have a journey of like, how do we grow ourselves with emotional literacy and intelligence? How do we exist in relationships, true humane relationships with each other at work? By the way, if you're ever in a relationship, you will have conflict. So don't think you'll ever not have conflict. You will always. So how do we navigate conflict? And so that's our discover and relate parts. But the last part is belonging of how do we promote inclusion, stop exclusion, and really become places where our whole selves belong to work. And then giving a shout out to millennials and Gen Z that are kicking my butt and making me think different. My middle daughter called me a moderate 2 years ago. And I was like, I can't be a moderate. She's like, Mom, it's okay. When you get older, you just stop thinking you can do things. And I'm like, I was like, but okay, Allison, you're getting old. But that part is like, we're playing with gamification and live simulations and how to create experiences for people, because this is
Which
soul
is
work.
where it's at now. Yeah.
Susan, this is soul work.
It's
It is.
soul work.
So how do we get people into practice? That's us. Yeah.
Yeah. And my deepest belief, I always cringe when I say it out loud because I don't know if, I always feel like I skate that
Yeah.
line, because I have a deep belief that so many of us don't like ourselves. We can't reconcile with what we consider the mistakes that we've made. And if we do not have compassion at the core, what I feel like is true self-love for all of who we are and the experiences and how we learn and how we expand and how we grow, how can we possibly extend compassion to others? And which leads me into one of my last questions for
Okay.
you. And I want you to let people know. Well, why don't you do that now? Why don't you let people know how they can find you?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So it's www.resilientleaders.com. So that's our website. We still run our old website, which is integrationsolutions.org, which houses more of our trauma curriculums. But this is where I am. It's easy to find me. You can find me on LinkedIn. I encourage people to watch my TED Talk. I was Allison Jackson.
You know
But
what? And we'll have that link. We'll have the
cool.
link for your TED Talk in the show notes.
On the show. That'll be great. So yeah, easy ways to find me. And yeah, and Susan knows how to find me always.
Yeah, exactly. So
So
here are my two questions for
all
you.
right, I'm
Ready?
ready.
What does self-love look like and mean to you?
Oh, I love that. So for me, self-love is moments of stillness and stopping. I think I told you and you loved it. My husband calls me the river and he's my rock. So I am always moving. I am growing. I am shaking. And that part of me will always live and I embrace it. That's part of self-love. But also realizing, and this is a trauma, echo of that I can be still and I won't be harmed, that stillness is not my enemy, and to hold stillness to let myself heal. Yeah.
That is so beautiful. Thank you. Finish the sentence for me. Hope is dot, dot, dot.
Oh, this is something I end every training with. So I know this one, what I believe. So hope is not just a feeling, it is a sense of future self. And if we cannot hold who we will be, we have no chance of getting there.
Oh, Allison, I love you so much.
I love you too. And thank you for
Thank
staying in my
you.
universe.
Thank you for staying in my universe. And thank you for the work, the soul work that you are out there doing. It's so critical. I think you and I have talked about there just feels like an urgent call to action around humanity, around our humanity and compassion. And so I love that you're one of the light beings out there in the world doing it. And I
Awesome.
just thank you for being here. I'm going to have you back on at some
I will.
point.
I know. Well, and I'll close because this will be me for you. I will say namaste. And
Namaste.
namaste, and I was taught namaste means the light in you I see in me, and the light in me I see in you. So to you
Yes.
and all of our listeners, namaste.
Namaste. And to my listeners, I love you guys. Thank you so much for showing up. I know that whoever needs to will take the nuggets they need from this and just go out there and rock your shine, you guys. I love you. Bye for now.
Bye.